Some lawsuits arrive in this courtroom dressed in the language of serious legal principle, printed on expensive paper and carried in by people whose hourly billing rate could cover a mortgage payment. The human capacity for finding creative ways to waste a morning never stops developing. A billionaire chief executive's daughter was suing her former assistant for leaking confidential company documents. Before this case reached its conclusion, this courtroom was going to determine whether the actual crime was the betrayal of confidentiality or what those documents revealed about a company that had spent considerable energy keeping them buried. That morning, Neca was awake at 5:47. Not because an alarm had sounded. Her body simply wakes at that hour now, trained by 4 years of early start times, of being first through the door and last to leave a life constructed entirely around the principle of being ready before anyone thought to ask. She ironed her blouse in the kitchen because her apartment is a studio and she does not own an ironing board. She ate half a piece of toast because she had no appetite and understood she probably would not develop one. She took the 6:15 bus because the 6:45 runs late on occasion, and she has not, across 11 years of professional life, arrived anywhere late. Not once. She arrived at my courtroom at 8:32. She sat in the hallway on a wooden bench with her documents arranged inside a manila folder, not a briefcase, a folder, the kind available at any drugstore for 40 cents, organized into sections with posted tabs that she had color-coded herself. She had no attorney. She had spoken with 3 of them, and each one had delivered the same conclusion in slightly different language. The case was strong. The opposition was stronger, meaning they had more money than she did, meaning the cost of fighting would exceed anything she stood to recover. So she sat on that bench alone. At 9:04, a black car arrived at the courthouse steps. Not a taxi, a car service with tinted windows. Celeste Hargrove did not pause to verify whether her parking was legal. That is what the driver is for. She was on a phone call as she came through the entrance. She ended it somewhere near the security checkpoint, not because the protocols required it, but because the conversation had run its course. The jacket she was wearing cost more than Neca earns in a month. I noticed it the moment she walked in. I have been behind this bench for more than 40 years. In that time, I have encountered every variety of human being that passes through a courthouse door, the frightened and the arrogant, the innocent and the guilty, the people who enter with fear living behind their eyes, and the people who enter with the settled conviction that fear is something that occurs to other people. Celeste Hargrove moved through this courtroom the way someone moves through a room in a building they already consider their own. She glanced at Neca once as she took her seat, not at her face, at her folder. Something shifted briefly at the corner of her mouth that I have no intention of describing as a smile. Her attorney, a senior partner at a firm I recognized, a man named Patrick Holloway, who had appeared in my courtroom on 2 prior occasions and both times had known better than to waste my time, leaned toward her and said something quietly. She nodded without looking at him. "Ms. Hargrove," I said, "we are going to begin." She looked up from her phone. "Of course, absolutely," she said, in a tone that communicated she was extending me a courtesy. We were going to have a very interesting morning. Let me tell you who Neca is. She is 34 years old. She arrived in this country at 19, carrying a scholarship, a suitcase, and a plan she has executed with extraordinary precision by any reasonable measure. Business degree, top of her class. Entry-level position at Hargrove Technologies at 23. Personal assistant to Warren Hargrove, chief executive and founder, within 2 years of joining. She earned $54,000 a year across 4 years in one of the most expensive cities in the country. $54,000 annually, working for a company that reported $2.3 billion in annual revenue. She took her lunch at her desk. She answered emails on weekends. She did not complain about any of this because she understood that she was building something and that patience and excellence were the only currency she had available, and she was spending them with care. 14 months before anything became public, Neca noticed something. She was processing payroll documentation, not her assigned responsibility, but someone had asked her to cross-reference a spreadsheet, as people frequently did because she was precise and reliable. She found a number that did not match, a salary figure. A woman in the engineering department, 11 years of experience, rated exceeds expectations in every review for the previous 6 years, being paid $18,000 less per year than 3 male colleagues carrying equivalent performance ratings and fewer years in the role. She told herself it was a formatting error. She checked another name, then another. She sat very still at her desk for approximately 20 minutes. Then she opened the company's internal human resources compliance portal and filed a formal report documented with the spreadsheet attached. 3 weeks later, an automated response informed her the report had been received and was under review. It remained under review for 4 months. She filed a second report, this time addressed directly to the head of human resources, accompanied by a cover message explaining specifically what she had found, including a summary of 11 employee records she had by then reviewed. She was precise. She was polite. She used the word concern 6 times so that no one could characterize her as inflammatory. She received a reply 11 days later, informing her that the company's compensation structure was compliant with all applicable regulations and that any perceived discrepancies were the result of performance band classifications requiring specialized context to interpret correctly. In other words, you do not understand what you are looking at. She understood exactly what she was looking at. She waited 3 months. She watched nothing change. She filed a third report, this time directed to the company's external compliance hotline, a number that, according to their own published ethics policy, was monitored by an independent board member. She never received a response. 6 months after that, she was called into a human resources meeting and informed that her position was being restructured. Her role had been consolidated. A severance offer was on the table. 6 weeks of pay in exchange for a signed non-disclosure agreement stating she had no claims against the company and would not discuss her employment publicly. She did not sign it. 2 weeks later, she gave one document, 1 page, the payroll summary for the engineering department, to a journalist she had located through a mutual contact, a journalist known for accuracy. She gave it with a single sentence. I tried to fix this from inside for 14 months. I have nothing left to try. The article ran on a Thursday. By Friday, she had received a letter from Patrick Holloway's firm informing her she was being sued for breach of confidentiality. She placed the letter in her manila folder. She took the 6:15 bus to my courtroom. She sat on that wooden bench with her 40-cent folder and her color-coded tabs, and she waited. Patrick Holloway opened with admirable efficiency. He was doing precisely what he was paid to do, and he was doing it well. The argument was clean. Neca had signed a confidentiality agreement upon hire. The document she had shared contained proprietary internal data. Sharing it constituted a clear breach. The plaintiff was seeking $85,000 in damages, a number I noted had been selected to land just above the threshold for small claims and just below the threshold that would have drawn significantly greater scrutiny. He sat down. Neca stood. She was calm in a way I have learned over decades to distinguish from composure. Not the calm of someone who is not afraid, the calm of someone who has already accepted the worst outcome and discovered, with some mild surprise, that they can survive it. She said, I reported a problem through every channel the company provided. 3 times over 14 months, no one acted. I made one choice that I understood would cost me, and I made it because 340 women were being underpaid, and I was the only person in a position to change that. I am not here to win anything. I am here because I will not sign something that says I was wrong. She sat back down. The courtroom went quiet, not the quiet of uncertainty, the quiet of a room that has just heard something true. The reporter in the 4th row, who had arrived expecting to cover a routine procedural follow-up, had stopped typing. An older woman near the back, waiting on her own case, had her hands folded in her lap and was looking at Neca with an expression I recognized from somewhere deep in my own history, something that lived between grief and admiration. Patrick Holloway was looking at his notepad. Mr. Holloway, I said, we are going to proceed with questions. I began with Celeste. Ms. Hargrove, you are the plaintiff in this action. That is correct. And you personally authorized this lawsuit? A slight pause. My legal team and I made that decision together. Yes. Your father's company, your legal team, I said. I allowed that to sit for a moment. Are you an officer of Hargrove Technologies? I serve on the advisory board. Advisory, not the board of directors. That is correct. So you hold no fiduciary authority over company decisions. Patrick Holloway said very quietly, Your Honor, I am asking a factual question, Mr. Holloway. Ms. Hargrove, I have significant influence over. That is not what I asked. Fiduciary authority, yes or no? A pause. No. Thank you, Ms. Hargrove. You have stated that Ms. Adeyemi violated a confidentiality agreement. How did you become aware of what information she had shared? From the article, when it was published. From the article, I repeated. Not from an internal investigation, not from a human resources process. From reading it. Yes. So you had no prior knowledge that Ms. Adeyemi had raised concerns about compensation practices at your father's company. She hesitated for the first time. A small thing. The kind most people in the gallery would not have registered. I registered it. I was aware there had been some kind of internal complaint. Some kind of internal complaint. I repeated the phrase exactly as she had delivered it. The woman in the back row shifted in her seat. When did you become aware of that? I am not certain of the exact date. Approximately. Several months before the article, perhaps. Several months. And what was your response to that information at the time? I was not directly involved. That went to human resources. Human resources handled it, I said. I looked down at my papers. I turned one page. Then I looked back up. Ms. Hargrove, in your professional experience, advisory or otherwise, when an employee files a formal internal complaint, what is the standard expected response time? She blinked. I believe the standard is 30 days. 30 days, I said. And if an employee filed 3 separate complaints over 14 months with no resolution, that would be a significant failure on the part of human resources. A significant failure, I said. I nodded slowly. But not your concern, since your role is advisory. I did not say that. What would you say? Patrick Holloway cleared his throat. Your Honor, I am not certain that the internal processes of Hargrove Technologies bear directly on the breach of confidentiality question that is before this court. Mr. Holloway, I did not raise my voice. I have never needed to. I have been listening to arguments about relevance in this courtroom since before your client was born. I will determine what is relevant. Thank you. He nodded once and went quiet. I turned back to Celeste. Ms. Hargrove, I would like to ask you a straightforward question. And I would like you to take a moment before answering it, because I want your genuine answer, not the one you arrived here prepared to give. Something shifted behind her eyes, barely visible, but present. You have testified that Ms. Adeyemi violated her confidentiality agreement by sharing a proprietary document. The foundation of this lawsuit is that the document was confidential, meaning it was not intended for public disclosure, and Ms. Adeyemi had no authorization to share it. That is correct. I see. I looked down at the bench in front of me. I took my time with it. Ms. Hargrove, if the document was confidential, if its contents were genuinely internal information, not intended to reach outside eyes, how did it come to appear in your company's own internal complaint log, filed by Ms. Adeyemi 14 months before she spoke to anyone outside the company? The courtroom went absolutely still. Celeste Hargrove opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Because a confidential document, by definition, becomes considerably less confidential the moment it is introduced into a formal internal complaint, I said, which means Ms. Adeyemi was not the first person to make this information visible. Your own compliance system was 14 months earlier, with your company's letterhead on the page. I reached to my left and lifted a single sheet of paper. I slid it across the bench toward Patrick Holloway, without a word. He looked down at it. I watched his face. He studied it for 11 seconds. I counted. Then he set his pen down on his notepad. He did not pick it up again. The page rested between us. Celeste looked at it from her seat. She recognized it. You do not authorize an $85,000 lawsuit without reviewing the documentation. She had seen this page before. She had known it existed. She had brought this case regardless, operating on the assumption that I would not locate it, or that it would not carry weight, or that the combination of her family's name and her attorney's hourly rate would render it beside the point. She had miscalculated. 40 years of people miscalculating in front of me, Mr. Holloway, I said. Would you like a recess to consult with your client? He said very quietly that he would appreciate that. You have 10 minutes, I told him. The recess lasted 8. When they returned, Patrick Holloway stood and informed the court that his client wished to withdraw the complaint. I understand, I said. I am going to say a few things before I process that, and I would appreciate your client's full attention. I looked directly at Celeste Hargrove. You walked into this courtroom this morning carrying everything I described. Resources, representation, a name that opens doors before anyone reaches for the handle, and you used all of it in an attempt to punish a woman for doing something your own company's protocol specifically invited her to do. She followed the rules, every single one of them. 14 months of following the rules, and she was let go for it. Celeste was looking at the table in front of her. I want you to understand something about what occurs in rooms like this one. Not conference rooms, not boardrooms. This room, the people who walk in here without attorneys, carrying folders purchased at a drugstore, those people are not naive. They are not unsophisticated. They are not operating under any confusion about how the world is arranged. They understand precisely how the world is arranged. That is why they are here rather than walking away, because they decided that even if everything in the world is positioned against them, they are going to make it look at them directly for 5 minutes and say what they know. The woman near the back of the gallery nodded once, slowly. Ms. Adeyemi lost her career. She lost 4 years of professional standing at a company that was, according to its own internal documents, using her precision and her discretion and her willingness to stay quiet to sustain a system that had been withholding wages from 340 of her colleagues. I paused. She reported it internally and was ignored. She reported it a second time and was patronized. She reported it a third time and was dismissed. And then, after 14 months of attempting to resolve it through every channel available to her, she took one document, one page, to one journalist. I let that land. That is not a breach of confidentiality. That is a person who had exhausted every sanctioned path and chose the only one remaining. There is a legal argument to be made about what she did. Your attorney is aware of it, and so am I. But you did not come to this courtroom to make a legal argument. You came to make her stop, that I will not assist you with. I signed the dismissal. I passed the paperwork to my clerk. Complaint dismissed. No costs awarded. Ms. Adeyemi, I would like a word with you before you leave. She came to the bench after the gallery had cleared. Up close, she looked more tired than she had appeared from a distance, the kind of tiredness that has moved past the muscles and past the point where any amount of sleep addresses it, the kind that accumulates during a long fight carried entirely alone. I said, "You did the right thing. I want you to understand that someone with more than 40 years of experience inside this system looked at what you did and found no fault in it." She said, "Thank you, Your Honor." She paused. Then she said she wanted to ask me something and apologized if it was not appropriate. "Go ahead," I told her. "If this had gone differently," she said, "if she had won." She was selecting her words the way she selected everything, carefully and without waste. The 340 employees, the back pay settlement negotiations that are still ongoing. If a judgment had been entered against me, if I had been found liable, that outcome would have been used against them in their proceedings. I understood what she was asking. Whether she had known when she walked through my doors that morning that she was not carrying only her own case. "I know," I said. "I just want you to know that I knew," she said simply. "It was not only mine." She thanked me again. She lifted her folder, She walked out of my courtroom at 11:43 in the morning. 6 months later, a journalist named Thomas Beckett called my chambers and asked if I had a moment. He told me that 2 weeks after the dismissal, Neca had contacted him. He had been preparing a significant follow-up story, one that incorporated new documentation about the full scope of the pay discrepancies and the company's documented responses. By his description, it would have made difficult reading for every party involved. She had asked him to wait, not permanently, not to abandon the story, to wait until the back pay settlement negotiations had concluded, so the 340 employees would not be negotiating against an active media cycle. He said she had no legal obligation to make that request. She had every right to allow him to publish. He wanted me to know that she had asked him not to. "Did you wait?" I asked. "I did," he said. "The settlement was finalized last month. $4.1 million in back pay distributed to 340 employees. Average payment of $12,058 per person. The story ran the following week." He paused. "I thought you would want to know she made that call." I thanked him. I sat with it for some time after I put the phone down. Here is what I want to say to you. After 40 years, justice is not complicated. Human beings make it complicated because complication benefits the people who can afford to pay for complication. Remove the Latin terminology, the billable hours, the procedural motions, the documents filed in the correct format by the correct firm on the correct letterhead. Remove all of that, and what remains is a simple question. Did you do right by the people around you? Neca sat in that hallway alone with a 40-cent folder and the full weight of everything she had already lost and everything she might still lose. And she had answered that question for herself long before she walked through my door. She was not there to be vindicated. She was not there seeking damages or a public apology or a moment of visible reckoning. She was there because somewhere across those 14 months of being ignored and dismissed and eventually discarded, she had decided she was not going to place her signature on a document that stated she had been wrong, and she had not been. I have been asked many times across many years what I believe this work is actually for, what a courtroom is doing in the world beyond the processing of claims and the management of disputes between parties. Here is what I believe. I believe it is one of the last places where a person carrying nothing but the truth can stand across from a person carrying everything except the truth, and the truth can still prevail. Not always, not automatically, not without cost. Neca paid a cost I would not have asked her to pay, and she paid it long before I ever saw her face. But she walked into my courtroom that morning and she sat at that table without an attorney and without a safety net. And she said, "I will not sign something that says I was wrong." And she was not wrong. That is the complete story. Everything else, the jacket, the car service, the name on the building, that is furniture. The truth is, the only thing in that room that carries any real weight. And on that particular morning at 8:32, it was sitting quietly in a manila folder, color-coded, organized into sections, and waiting to be heard.